to talk about higher and lower than consensus, and also you talking about ADP for people who have got money on the line. Well, in the draft I did, if you have your own rankings in front of you and you on an actual bit of paper and you can cross them off as people get drafted, you can see where the value is still on your draft board or your sheet. And if you're going by the ADP list on the app you're using, which is why I bring Judy up, because he was the 104th player ranked on this ADP guide.
Wow.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, he was 104th.
Where were you drafting?
This was on Sleeper last week. I just do not. So it was 104th. It was Superflex, but even so, I was at 104th. How many rounds do I let him slide? And I was at the back end of the 7th, and I was like, I have to pull the trigger on Juju now.
Oh, what?
Yeah,
that's
I know.
Wild value.
And it was because people obviously hadn't scrolled far enough down the list to find him, and because they didn't have the list of players ticked off, they'd forgotten he existed because he wasn't in front of them. So I was just thinking, can I let him fall? Can I let him fall? And it got to the 7th. I took him at 7-8, and then somebody who was drafting after him was like, "Oh, I wish you let Juju fall a little bit further. Like I was hoping he'd fall." And I was like, "Yeah, of course you were. You didn't even know he existed until I just drafted him." But yeah, so like you say, ADP from people who put money on the line is far more accurate at the moment than some of the other places that we're drafting. And that brings me to high and lower, because I am super high on Juju this year, like almost probably, as Murf would say, crazy high. But we won't get into that today. We've talked about it already. Do you have anyone player-wise that you're higher on the consensus, and maybe a couple of positions, and as to why you are on them? And then is there anyone you're absolutely down on against consensus this year at the moment?
Wow, there's a lot. I think I don't normally look at where the ECR, like the expert consensus rankings, but because you mentioned that we were going to do this, I took a quick look here. I have Cam Newton at QB 14. The expert consensus rankings on Fantasy Pros is QB 18. I was a little higher on this Patriots offense, even with Jarrett Stidham under center, because at that point, I wasn't taking Stidham anywhere near QB 14, but he was a guy that could run the ball a little bit. And also, we're talking about Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels. I have a lot of faith, and maybe it's the Bills fan in me, but I have a lot of faith that those guys are going to figure out how to generate some offense. They've done it basically every time Brady's gone down, whether it was Matt Castle stepping in several years ago, whether it was during Brady's suspension when they had Garoppolo and Brissett, and they were kind of just piecing it together at quarterback. They've been able to win games. They've been able to produce offense. And the weapons there aren't that bad. Like Julian Edelman is a 90 catch guy still, could be a 100 catch guy. N'Keal Harry, we were all so high on last year. He gets hurt. He comes in. There should be no shock that he doesn't create separation. People that are pointing to that, we knew that coming out. He's more of a contested catch guy. And now he's got a quarterback who's had experience with guys like that and is willing to throw the ball up to him and maybe not be as hard on him for being a rookie that doesn't know the offense yet because he missed the first half of the season on injury reserve and that sort of stuff. The running backs there, Sony Michel being extremely underrated, has over 1,800 rushing yards in his first 2 seasons here, and yet everyone wants to just pass him by. Hopefully he'll be healthy to start the season, but James White, another good option. Mo Sanu was hurt after he came over to the Patriots down the stretch. So there's some very professional players in that offense, and now they don't need to lift up this young quarterback. You got a guy who's a former MVP joining the team there. You look at Tom Brady, he had 5 rushing touchdowns over the last 2 years. You don't think Cam Newton can do that and, add to his numbers on top of some rushing yards that Brady couldn't produce? So I'm very, very willing to take Cam Newton just outside of that QB1 range. And if we see him in practice looking really good, I would probably move him into that low-end QB1 range over some guys like Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees and Matt Stafford. I think he'll jump those guys if we see him on a practice field looking healthy. So he's definitely one. Let's look at the other positions. Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake, to me, is a first-round pick this year. Now, last year, he only played 8 games with them. If you double those numbers, you put on pace what he did in those 8 games over a full 16-game schedule, he would have finished as the running back 2 behind only Christian McCaffrey. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I think he has a lot more upside that people are giving him credit for. I have him at RB6 right now. I'm not sure where the consensus was on that one, but RB6, I'd be willing to take him in the first round. And I've gotten a hard time. I got a hard time a few months ago for taking him in the late second round in one draft. Crazy. And now I'm happy to take him in the late first, and I'm still getting a hard time, but I don't think it's going to be a problem come the season. I think I'm going to cash in there. At wide receiver, Allen Robinson, DJ Moore. I mean, just look at what these guys have done recently. Allen Robinson playing with a completely erratic Mitch Trubisky last year. I think he had 98 catches. He had over 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns. Maybe you get something a little better from Trubisky this year, or maybe you get Nick Foles coming in and helping to stabilize, give some average quarterback play. I have Allen Robinson all the way up at wide receiver 5. Now, part of that is because after you get through those first 4, it's very close for, and you kind of mentioned it with Juju, when you're going from like wide receiver 5 to wide receiver 17, 18, it's not that much of a difference in the projections. You could really bump guys up and down quite a bit in that range. But I think Allen Robinson is somebody with a lot of upside, maybe even 100 catch upside in that offense as well. DJ Moore, what he's done as a young player with bad quarterback play last season to do what he did with Kyle Allen as his quarterback. And now you're not getting an elite quarterback coming in, but you're getting Teddy Bridgewater, who's just a much better version of Kyle Allen. He's still going to want to throw short and rely on his receivers to rack up yards after the catch. So I have DJ Moore inside my top 10. I have him at wide receiver 8. And he's a guy, in my mind, maybe the biggest breakout this season. We could be talking about him next year as a top 4, top 5 receiver, I think. The sky's the limit for him in that offense with that new coaching staff. It's going to be a really good attack, I think. And they're going to be forced to throw the ball because their defense is terrible. They are completely rebuilding the defense now, and it's going to take a while for all those rookies to catch up, especially with this offseason like we talked about. So DJ Moore is going to be up there in volume. And the one thing about him that people don't like is the touchdowns, but touchdowns can be a very wild stat from year to year, right? And generally, yardage tends to be predictive of touchdowns. So we haven't seen it for him yet, but if he continues at this pace, and I think he will, we're going to see those touchdowns come around. Tight end, who did I write down here? Eric Ebron. We're one season removed from Eric Ebron putting up 14 total touchdowns with good quarterback play. Then he has a year where the quarterback play disappears. It's Jacoby Brissett. No offense to Jacoby Brissett, but he's not Andrew Luck. And now you have Ebron going to a team where we think there's going to be much better quarterback play. You think Ben Roethlisberger looks like he's going to come back healthy. That offense has a lot of potential. And even if the yardage isn't there, right? They got Juju. I really like Deontay Johnson. We don't know. He's not really proven yet, though. But even if the yardage isn't there for Ebron, the touchdowns, they could still be. They need a weapon around the red zone. So I think there's a shot we see Ebron have a year, kind of like we saw Jared Cook have last season, where the yardage isn't huge, but the touchdown numbers are there. And with tight end, you put up a big touchdown total, and you could definitely be, a top 10 tight end pretty easily, maybe even higher than that. So I really like Ebron, and he's going off the board. I'd take him just outside of my top 12. He's going off the board outside the top 20. He's really undrafted in most places. So those are some guys that I really like. I mean, there's so many more. If you want me to go into the guys I don't like, Baker Mayfield. Yes. I know we were excited about him last year. We were excited. And I think efficiency-wise, I think he's going to be much better this season. The problem is that new coaching staff, that new system that's coming in. Kevin Stefanski is going to bring what they were doing in Minnesota. The volume is not going to be there for Baker. He's got all those weapons around him, but they're going to run the ball primarily. So while the efficiency is going to go up, while the interceptions are probably going to come down, kind of like we see with Kirk Cousins, right? He's a guy who doesn't put up a lot of interceptions. You're not going to see the big games consistently from Mayfield. It's going to be just like Kirk Cousins. You're going to see a big game once in a while when they have to throw, but normally he is not going to have big volume, at least not big enough to be a real fantasy asset, in my opinion, at a position that's so deep that I'm going to rather go with guys like Gardner Minshew and Teddy Bridgewater. 100%. There's so many quarterbacks out there you could take. I have Baker Mayfield outside of my top 20, and I think that's much different than a lot of people. James Conner, and this isn't a talent thing, but I'm staying away from him. I know there's a lot of people who want to invest in him because of the price. You're getting a guy who could potentially put up top 5, top 10 numbers, but I look at him as a player that I don't think he's going to be able to stay healthy for a full season. And if he does stay healthy, I think it's going to be at a reduced workload. I think it's going to require them to get other running backs in the mix, and that's going to take away that ceiling for him a little bit. We had Dr. Edwin Porras from Fantasy Points on our podcast a little while ago, and he kind of reiterated the same thing, that he was concerned now that unless they lower the volume, that and maybe that is a strategy you could take. If you want to get Connor and just say, you know what, maybe I get him for half a season and then I'll figure it out after that when he does get hurt. You can totally do that. There's guys like Will Fuller or Brandon Cooks that I would probably approach the same way there. Just don't think that you're going to get a guy who's going to give you that top 5 stats for the whole season, because I don't think Connor's capable of doing it. At wide receiver, I don't want to harp on the Browns, but Odell Beckham Jr. And injuries were a big part of it last year. And if they were going to run the same offenses last year and he was going to be healthy and you were coming into the season with Jarvis Landry a little banged up, like it seems like he's going to be, maybe I'd be a little more excited about Beckham. But in this offense, we saw it with Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs. They would have big games, but they really had to survive on being incredibly efficient in order to be consistent. And Thielen at one point was doing that early last year before he got hurt. He was scoring touchdowns despite the fact he was getting 6-7 targets a game. He'd score a touchdown and keep his fantasy value intact. But over the course of a whole season, it's going to be tough for Beckham to get back into the wide receiver 1 rank. So I look at it more as a low-end wide receiver 2. If we see Landry come back healthy, if they rely on the tight ends a little more, which I think they're going to, Austin Hooper and David Njoku, if he doesn't get traded. You have Kareem Hunt now. They're catching passes out of the backfield. It's going to be really hard for Beckham to put up the volume there. I know I've been talking forever. We got one more. We'll do tight end that I don't like. Noah Fant. And this is another one where volume is going to be the issue. I love the talent, but look what they've done. They've gone and added all these pieces in the passing game. Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Albert Boone, who was teammates in college with Drew Lock. So there's a bit of a connection there. We could see him siphon some touchdowns away. I think it's a team that wants to run the ball as well. And you have Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay. I see this as a situation where it is going to be tough to predict who outside of maybe Cortland Sutton is going to catch a lot of passes in that offense. So I'd be staying away from Noah Fant at this point. Where you maybe saw him as potentially a tight end 1 this year, I have him way down where other people have Eric Ebron kind of around that tight end 20 range.